Hi. This is probably going to be the very first video that I post for my new YouTube channel, Sailing Vessel MIG. I thought I would do a video, maybe a two-parter, that tells about this whole project and what happened and why I'm doing this. For all four of you that subscribe, I don't know how many people are going to subscribe, and it doesn't really matter. The first thing that I'd like to say is my name is Christopher Burton. My family is Rebecca, Jimmy, Canyon, Caleb, Benjamin, and my wonderful daughter Emily Ann. Not that the boys aren't wonderful, they are. But I make special note of her simply because she's my sailing buddy. Anyway, in 2005, at that time we owned a house on the prairie on a farm, and we ran a home for troubled boys. When my daughter was born, my wife and I decided that we could no longer continue to run a home for troubled boys, for obvious reasons. You probably don't need an explanation there. So she asked me one night, what would you like to do, since we had to make a big change? And I said, I would like to sell everything we have, buy a sailboat, and sail around the world. And she instantly replied, let's do that. I know, that right there is the biggest miracle in all of this. The fact that she wanted to do it. So we bought a sailboat. I did a lot of research. I had been reading for years. The dream goes way back. I was one of those guys with a stack of sailing magazines by the toilet. And I read every book that had anything to do with sailing history, the history of the old great age of sail. And she wasn't surprised, obviously, when I said that. I'm sure that she had an idea that I might reply with that, as a matter of fact. So we bought an aluminum cutter named Wandering Dolphin. And we took all the sailing courses that you can take with the American Sailing Association. We would go out to her family in Washington State from Montana, where we lived, and we would take a couple of the boys with us, and we would go through all the sailing courses. And that was fun. The offshore sailing portion of that was between Victoria, British Columbia, and Blaine, Washington, which is not offshore by any stretch of the imagination. But we didn't know that. But it did give a lot of good information for sailing offshore. But when I bought Wandering Dolphin, I flew down to Florida, did the inspection and the survey, and brought everything back up from the survey that needed to be done. And then two boys from the farm sailed with me with the intention of sailing through the Panama Canal and up to Washington State. And I had no idea what I was in for. Even though I had taken all those courses, even though I had read all of that, I had no idea what I was in for. So I got out in the Gulf Stream, which, by the way, I was so ignorant at that point that I didn't even know that I should check the weather before I went out into the Gulf Stream. And I lucked out, there was no north wind. So it was a pretty good sail across the Gulf Stream. But then I knew what offshore sailing really was. The Gulf Stream was kicking up some pretty good sized rollers, and then things started to break. And that was another thing that I had read about. Oh, boats break. You know, stuff's always breaking. You're always fixing a boat in a pretty place. But to know that and then to experience it were two different things. Little things started happening. Water was pouring into the boat from the bow, and I didn't know where it was coming from. The bilges were full. I traced it down, and all it was the anchor locker had a couple of vents on each side that I had, in my ignorance, failed to secure before going offshore. So I was able to fix that pretty quick. No water's coming in the boat now. However, when I tried to pump all the water out, the bilge pump stopped working. And I went, oh, I have a manual bilge pump. Went to the back, started pumping with the manual bilge pump, and discovered that within about 4 strokes, the bellows on the manual bilge pump had split, and now I didn't have a manual bilge. So I did find out what was wrong with the electric bilge pump. It was one of the little rocker arm bilge pumps, and the pulley that controlled the little belt had just come off, and it was just a set screw needed to be tightened. It worked fine. So I fixed that. There were multiple other things. I could go on and on about that passage, but what I did learn before I got to the Bahamas was that I have no business being out there, especially with a couple of kids that aren't my own. So we put the boat in the Bahamas, and we began to learn to sail in the Bahamas. We would fly down from Montana and sail and do the Exumas and the Abacos and the Berries, and it was wonderful. And that's the way, if you're wondering how to get your wife to love sailing, take her sailing in the Bahamas. That's the way to do it. That's the most beautiful place to learn to sail, and we had 7-foot draft on Wandering Dolphin, so we learned a lot about keeping the boat afloat and not aground. Anyway, we then moved on the boat in 2005, and that's a whole different story. Maybe I'll do a video about that someday. But we ended up moving onto the boat in 2005 with our entire family. So there were 5 kids, mom and dad, on a 47-foot length overall sailboat, 41 on deck. And I'm not going to get into Wandering Dolphin too much, but I will suffice it to say Wandering Dolphin is a amazing boat. Just wonderful. Designed by Gary Mull, so she sails to windward like a witch. And we fortunately met Beth Leonard and Evan Starzinger and sailed with them for a little while down in the Caribbean shortly after we began sailing and living on the boat full time. And they, Beth specifically, changed our life for sailing after that. She told us, get all the crap off your deck. You have too much crap up here. Too much chain in your anchor locker. This boat will sail to windward amazing. She'll go off the wind in light airs beautifully, but she needs to be light, especially up high on the decks. And at that time, we had stuff piled all the way down. We had 8 different jugs for fuel and water, and they were always full. And we had 350 feet of chain in the anchor locker up front, and 2 huge anchors. And we just copied what they did on Hawk, and that changed a lot for us. We were able to cut the weight down in the bow down to an acceptable amount. Got 1 anchor all the way off of there, put it away down in the hold, and we made also a big change in our sailing weather window choices. We stopped going for the weather window that everybody wanted. Everybody wanted a weather window with no wind. They were looking for these perfect passages where there was no wind and no seas, and we would motor everywhere with this beautiful sailboat, and we began to sail instead. So when we left Luperon, Dominican Republic, for example, we chose a weather window that, yes, we're going to have to sail to windward, but the wind was blowing 15 to 20 knots. And as we left Luperon, Bruce Van Sant was on the radio hollering, "It's a no-go, it's a no-go," and that's because he was waiting for all the cruisers in the anchorage to wait for that window that had no wind, and then they'd motor down the coast. And instead, we sailed out of Luperon, sailed to the Silver Banks, just a nice offshore windward passage, and then we tacked and sailed all the way to Boquerón on the next tack. And yeah, it took a lot longer, and it was rough, but we sailed the whole way. And that's how we began to learn to sail where we were going. When we would later leave St. Thomas, we would sometimes, when we were leaving for the season to head south to Trinidad or Grenada, we would just simply set the sails on a comfortable tack, and then we would go and look at the chart and see where we were going. And one time we were sailing straight for St. Kitts and Nevis, and we told the kids, we're going to be in St. Kitts and Nevis. And they were all excited. And as we approached St. Kitts, turned out we couldn't go to St. Kitts anymore. So we tacked off, and he said, Caleb, one of our boys, was really upset. And he said, well, where are we going? And I said, I don't know. We're going to find out as soon as we tack out a ways and then set another course. We ended up going all the way to Dominica that time, and it was wonderful. We had a great time. We never did get to St. Kitts and Nevis, just because the wind had clocked a little bit and we couldn't make that close a heading. So that was a big change too. We were never destination bound necessarily. It was always, can we do that? Yeah, well, looks like we can. Oh, nope, we can't. Tack off the other way. Find out where we're going. Anyway, I'm not in any way trying to convince everybody that that's the way you should sail. That's not what this is about. I'm just saying these are things that we learned. It changed us in our cruising. It changed our sailing in a big way. And I say all that because it does relate to this new expedition that I'm about to go on. We sailed up and down the Caribbean. We sailed the east coast of the U.S., and then in 2015, we sailed across the Caribbean to the Panama Canal, went through the Panama Canal, and then we sailed up to Costa Rica. And then from Costa Rica, we sailed to Hawaii, which was about 4,800 miles the way that we went, because we had to sail. And again, my weather router was hollering and screaming at me, telling me I needed to take 10 or 12 big jugs of fuel along because there's the doldrums. And I said, no, I'm not going to do that. So, because we had the boat that we had, that trip took 38 days. There were many days that we were sailing 2 knots all day long, all night long. It was pretty great. 38 days. And we left with 120 gallons of fuel in the tanks because we don't carry any on the decks. And we actually arrived in Hawaii with about 60 gallons left. So that's how little motoring we did, even though there were many days that anybody else would have motored probably. But we just chose to just inchworm along. And then from Hawaii, we sailed north and then east to Washington State. That took 28 days. And that's where our sail on Wandering Dolphin ended. We lived in the marina in Blaine for a little while, and then we lived in the marina in Anacortes. I began working for a launch boat company, and Becky began bartending and serving again. And the kids all had been homeschooled up to that point, and then they wanted to go to school, so they got into high school. They went all the way through high school. They decided they wanted to stay there and go to school. So we moved into a house, and we've been in a house now for about 6 years. And I never lost the desire to sail around the world. Everybody else, they're happy with their land lives. I think that Emily Ann, she wants to sail, but I don't know if she wants to live on a boat. But I still do. My wife is happy to live on land, but she loves her husband. But she's done enough sailing. She doesn't want to sail across oceans anymore. So what we've done is we've purchased a North Sea 27. It's a 1977 North Sea 27. It's hull number 51, I think. I'll have to look to make sure, but I think that's it. And we picked her up in my daughter and I went down to Alameda, picked it up. And brought it north, and that's a whole different story, which I will be putting videos on and telling what happened on all of the trip north with this little boat, Mig. I'm sitting on Mig right now, and over the last 2 years I've done a complete refit on Mig. I'm still in the process of finishing it up, but I'm going to go through and let everybody know what the plans were for Mig and what I've done on it on the next video. This video is to tell everybody what the plan is. So the plan is to leave here in Anacortes, Washington, sometime probably in the fall. I believe what I'm going to do is leave here the 1st of October, sometime around there, maybe a little earlier, and sail it down the west coast of the U.S. to San Diego and join the Baja Ha and sail from there down to Mexico. And my wife and I will spend some time sailing in Mexico. I'm going to come back here for Thanksgiving and Christmas and then go back to the boat. And then in the spring, I'm going to sail to Marquesas. And I don't know who's going with me. I'm not soloing it. This is not a sail around the world alone voyage by any stretch of the imagination. I would sail alone, but I really don't like the company well enough. So what I'm going to do is invite friends that have sailed with me for years and years to come on passages. Also my family. Different ones of my kids will come on different passages. Emily Ann, my daughter, will join me for every single passage she wants to make. She's my sailing buddy, and I hope she comes all the way with me. It would be great. I have a friend in Canada who is considering going all the way around the world with me. That would be great. He's a high school buddy, and if he does that, then that'll be really fun. He and I get along famously, literally, or infamously. We have a ball together, and both of us can sit all day long and not say a word to each other, and there's no tension, there's no concern that something's wrong. It's just a comfortable friendship. So I hope he goes along with me. You hear that, John? So that's the plan.
Heading out on our own with our hope in the clouds, and we're starting to see that we're onto something. Feel it coming, we'll keep running, nothing in our way, and we got no reason to wait. Let the journey take you where it wants to. We'll continue